Ryan adjusted his grip on the small hand of his 5-year-old daughter, Lily, as they stood outside the corner diner. His stomach ached with hunger, but his wallet was worse off than he was. He exhaled sharply, staring down at the single $5 bill in his hand, the last of his money. Rent was due in a few days, and his shifts at the auto shop had been cut again. "Daddy, I'm hungry," Lily tugged at his sleeve, her big blue eyes filled with trust, completely unaware of how badly he was struggling. Ryan forced a smile. "I know, sweetheart. Let's get you something good to eat, okay?" As they stepped inside, the scent of fresh coffee and sizzling bacon filled the air. The place was nearly empty, except for a woman sitting alone by the window. She had dark auburn waves cascading over her shoulders, and her emerald green dress looked expensive, too expensive for a place like this. But what caught Ryan's attention wasn't her beauty. It was the way she stared at her untouched plate of food with an unreadable expression, as if the world around her didn't exist. Lily, ever the curious one, pointed at the woman. "Daddy, she looks sad." Ryan hesitated. He wasn't the kind of guy to get involved in a stranger's problems. He already had enough of his own. But something about the woman struck a chord deep inside him. Before he could stop himself, he walked over. "Hey," he said, his voice rough from exhaustion, "are you okay?" The woman blinked as if she'd just realized he was there. Her green eyes were sharp yet tired. Yeah, just thinking." Ryan hesitated, then glanced down at the $5 bill still in his hand. He had planned to buy Lily a small meal, but something about this woman made him do something reckless. He placed the bill on the table in front of her. "Here, if you need it." The woman stared at the money, then at him, her expression unreadable. "You're giving me money," Ryan shrugged. "You look like you need it more than I do." For a moment, there was silence. Then she laughed, not in a cruel way, but in sheer disbelief. "You have no idea how ironic this is," she murmured, shaking her head. Ryan frowned, suddenly feeling foolish. Maybe he'd misread the situation. Maybe she was just another rich woman with problems he couldn't begin to understand. He started to grab the money back, but she covered it with her hand. "Wait," she said, her voice softer now. "You don't have much, do you?" Her eyes flickered to Lily, who was now coloring on a napkin with a crayon from her tiny backpack. Ryan clenched his jaw. He hated pity. "We're fine." The woman studied him for a long moment, then she smiled genuinely this time. "What's your name?" "Ryan." He hesitated before adding, "and this is Lily." She looked down at Lily, her expression softening. "Hi, Lily," she said warmly. Lily beamed. "Hi, pretty lady," the woman chuckled. "I'm Madeleine." She turned back to Ryan. "You have no idea who I am, do you?" Ryan raised an eyebrow. "Should I?" Madeleine leaned back in her seat, amusement flickering in her gaze. "No, and I like that." Before Ryan could respond, she reached into her purse, pulled out a crisp $100 bill and placed it on the table. Ryan stiffened. "What's that for?" "For your kindness," she said simply. "And for Lily's dinner." Ryan stared at the bill, then back at her. He didn't take handouts. He worked for what he had, no matter how little it was. "I can't take that," he said. Madeleine tilted her head. "Why not? You had no problem offering me your last $5. Ryan's jaw tightened. "That was different," she smiled. "How?" He didn't have an answer to that. Lily tugged at his sleeve. "Daddy, can I have pancakes?" Ryan exhaled. Pride was one thing, but Lily was hungry. He looked at Madeleine, searching for any sign of pity in her expression, but there was none, just quiet understanding. Finally, he nodded. "All right, but I'll pay you back." Madeleine's smile widened. "We'll see about that." As the waitress came over to take their order, Ryan couldn't shake the feeling that this woman, this stranger, was about to change everything. He just didn't know how much yet. The scent of buttery pancakes and freshly brewed coffee filled the air as Ryan watched Lily dig into her plate with unrestrained enthusiasm. Her small hands clutched the fork, syrup clinging to her fingertips as she took another bite. The sight eased some of the tension in his chest, though the weight of Madeleine's presence across from him kept him on edge. She sipped her coffee, studying him with an expression he couldn't quite decipher. He wasn't used to being under scrutiny, especially not from a woman who looked like she belonged in a high-rise penthouse rather than a diner with fading wallpaper and wobbly chairs. "You don't seem like the kind of man who takes charity," she said, breaking the silence. Ryan tensed instinctively. "I don't. Then why accept mine?" He set his coffee down, meeting her gaze evenly. "Because she was hungry, that's the only reason." Madeleine tilted her head slightly, as if weighing his words. "You're a proud man." Ryan exhaled sharply. "I just don't like owing people." A slow smile crossed her lips. "Then think of it as an investment," his brow furrowed. "In what?" "You." The single word sent a flicker of unease through him. Ryan had spent years relying on no one but himself. The idea that someone, especially a woman he'd just met, considered him worth investing in didn't sit right. "You don't even know me," he pointed out. "True," she admitted, "but I know enough." "You were willing to give away the last of what you had to help a stranger. That says more about you than most people I meet." Ryan wasn't sure what to say to that. He shifted uncomfortably, glancing at Lily, who was now humming softly as she nibbled on the last piece of her pancake. Madeleine leaned forward slightly. "What do you do for work?" "Mechanic," he answered without hesitation. "I fix cars." "Do you own the shop?" Ryan huffed a quiet laugh, shaking his head. "No, just work there. Hours got cut recently, though." Her expression remained unreadable. And Lily's mother? His jaw tightened instinctively. That was a subject he rarely talked about. But something about Madeleine's gaze made it clear she wasn't asking out of curiosity, she genuinely wanted to understand. "She left when Lily was a baby," he said, his voice even. "Haven't heard from her since." Madeleine didn't look surprised, but there was something in her eyes, something almost akin to understanding. "That must have been hard," she said softly. Ryan shrugged. "You do what you have to." A quiet moment stretched between them. Then Madeleine reached into her purse and pulled out a sleek black card, sliding it across the table toward him. Ryan eyed it warily. "What's this?" "My card," she said simply. "Come work for me," he blinked. "What?" "I own several businesses," she continued, her tone matter of fact. "One of them is a luxury car restoration company. I need someone who knows their way around an engine, someone who actually cares about their work." Ryan stared at her, his mind racing. This had to be some kind of joke. "You don't even know if I'm good at what I do," he said. She lifted a brow. "You wouldn't have offered me your last $5 if you weren't a man who took pride in what he does." Ryan exhaled, rubbing a hand over his jaw. "This is crazy." "Think about it," she said, standing. "It's not charity, Ryan, it's a job." She turned to Lily, offering her a warm smile. "It was lovely meeting you, sweetheart." Lily grinned. "You too, pretty lady," Madeleine chuckled, then looked back at Ryan. "Call me when you're ready." With that, she walked out of the diner, her emerald dress swaying as she disappeared into a sleek black car waiting outside. Ryan stared down at the card in his hand, his pulse pounding. This woman, this millionaire, had just walked into his life and flipped it upside down. And for the first time in a long time, he wasn't sure what to do next. Ryan sat at the small, worn-down kitchen table in his apartment, staring at the sleek black business card between his fingers. It felt out of place against the chipped wooden surface, like a diamond sitting atop a pile of gravel. His gut told him this was too good to be true. People like Madeleine didn't just offer jobs to guys like him. Lily sat across from him, swinging her legs beneath the chair as she carefully arranged her crayons in a neat row. She had no idea how much weight was pressing down on him at this moment. The card taunted him. The logical part of his brain told him to throw it away, to forget about this mysterious woman who had swept into his life with an offer that sounded more like a fantasy than reality. But another part, the part that had spent too many nights worrying about bills and too many mornings dreading another cut shift, whispered that maybe, just maybe, this was the break he needed. Taking a steady breath, he reached for his phone and dialed the number printed in crisp silver letters. It rang twice before a familiar voice answered. You took your time, Madeleine said, her tone laced with quiet amusement. Ryan rested his elbow on the table. I don't like rushing into things. I can respect that. There was a brief pause before she continued. Does that mean I can expect you at my office tomorrow? His fingers tapped lightly against the table's surface. I'll come in, no promises beyond that. Fair enough, she replied smoothly. I'll have my assistant send you the details. Before he could second-guess himself, he agreed, ending the call. He set the phone down, feeling the weight of his decision settle over him. Lily looked up, curiosity bright in her eyes. Who was that? Ryan reached across to ruffle her hair. Just someone who might be helping Daddy with a new job. Her face lit up. Will we get more pancakes? A quiet chuckle escaped him. Maybe. The next morning, Ryan stood in front of a gleaming glass building that towered over the street below. He hadn't expected something this massive. Luxury car restoration had conjured images of a high-end garage, not a corporate skyscraper. Steeling himself, he stepped inside. The lobby was pristine, polished floors reflecting the soft glow of modern chandeliers. A receptionist greeted him with a professional nod, before directing him toward an elevator that carried him to one of the upper floors. When the doors opened, he was met with an office that felt more like a showroom. Expensive artwork lined the walls, and behind a sleek wooden desk sat Madeleine, effortlessly composed in a tailored outfit that made her look every bit the powerhouse she clearly was. You showed up, she remarked, leaning back in her chair. Ryan stepped inside, glancing around at the luxury that surrounded him. Figured I owed you that much. She gestured toward a chair across from her desk. Have a seat. He did, keeping his posture relaxed despite the tension coiled in his stomach. I won't waste your time, she said, folding her hands atop the desk. I'm offering you a position at my restoration branch. You'll be working on some of the rarest, most valuable cars in the world. It pays well, full benefits, and more stability than what you have now. Ryan studied her, trying to gauge if there was a catch. Why me? Her expression didn't waver. Because I trust my instincts, and they tell me you're the kind of man who won't just see this as a paycheck. You'll take pride in the work. He let out a slow breath. And what if I walk away? She lifted a shoulder in a small shrug. Then I'll respect that decision. But I have a feeling you won't. He hated how confident she sounded, mostly because she wasn't wrong. The thought of working on luxury cars, of finally having financial stability for Lily, was too tempting to ignore. After a long moment, he nodded. All right. I'm in. Madeleine's lips curved slightly. Good choice. As he left her office, contract in hand, Ryan couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. Madeleine wasn't just giving him a job. She was pulling him into a world he had never belonged to, and he had no idea what that would mean for him or Lily. Ryan stood in the middle of the gleaming garage, the scent of polished leather and engine oil filling his lungs. His hands rested on the hood of a vintage Aston Martin, the kind of car he had only ever seen in magazines. Now, it was his job to bring it back to life. It had been weeks since he started working for Madeleine's company, and every day still felt surreal. The pay was more than he had ever made, and for the first time in years, he wasn't constantly worrying about how he would keep the lights on. Lily had new clothes, a better daycare, and even a small savings account started in her name. But the biggest change had nothing to do with money. It was Madeleine. She had become a constant in his life, appearing at the garage unexpectedly, watching him work with quiet interest, sometimes bringing coffee and sitting with him while he explained what he was doing. It was strange how easily she fit into his world despite coming from one so different. One evening, as Ryan locked up the shop, he found Madeleine waiting outside, leaning against her sleek black car. The city lights reflected off the hood, casting a soft glow on her elegant features. Thought you'd be at one of those fancy business dinners, he said, approaching her. She smiled, something warm and effortless. I had one, but I left early. His brow lifted slightly. Why? Madeleine hesitated, then looked him in the eye. Because I'd rather be here. The words settled between them, heavy yet unspoken in meaning. Ryan wasn't a man who got caught up in illusions. He knew what kind of woman Madeleine was: successful, wealthy, and used to a world that operated on power and privilege. He had no business wanting her, and yet he did. He exhaled slowly, glancing at her car. "You want to get out of here?" Her lips curved slightly. "Where to?" "Somewhere real," he said. Instead of questioning him, she nodded, slipping into the passenger seat as he took the driver's side. He drove away from the city, away from the towering buildings and high-end restaurants, until they reached a quiet overlook on the edge of town. The view stretched wide, stars flickering faintly above, the distant glow of the city behind them. Madeleine stepped out, wrapping her arms around herself against the cool breeze. Ryan leaned against the hood of the car, watching her closely. "You ever just stop?" he asked. She turned to him, curiosity in her eyes. "What do you mean?" He gestured at the skyline. "Stop running. Stop chasing the next deal, the next success. Just exist for a minute." Madeleine was quiet for a long moment before she spoke. "I don't think I ever have." Ryan studied her, seeing something in her expression that she rarely let anyone else see: vulnerability. "Then maybe it's time you did," he said softly. She stepped closer, the space between them shrinking. "And what about you? Do you stop?" He huffed a quiet laugh. "Didn't have much choice. Life forced me to slow down." Her gaze flickered with understanding. "I envy that." Ryan shook his head. "No, you don't." She hesitated, then reached for his hand, her fingers cool against his warmth. "I envy having something real, something that isn't tied to money or expectations." The way she said it made his chest tighten. "You have that," he murmured, "if you want it." Madeleine searched his face, as if trying to decide if he meant it. Then, cautiously, she stepped even closer, her body brushing against his. Ryan didn't think. He reached out, cupping her face gently, his thumb brushing over her cheek. Her breath hitched slightly, but she didn't pull away. "I shouldn't want this," she whispered. "Neither should I," he admitted. But neither of them moved. And when he finally closed the distance between them, pressing his lips to hers, it wasn't rushed or desperate. It was slow, deliberate, a confirmation of everything that had been building between them from the moment they met. Madeleine melted into him, her hands gripping the front of his shirt as if anchoring herself. Ryan deepened the kiss, his fingers tangling in her hair, pulling her closer, even though it was already impossible to be any nearer. When they finally pulled apart, their breaths mingling in the cool night air, Ryan rested his forehead against hers. "This is crazy," she murmured. "Yeah," he agreed, "but it feels right." Madeleine exhaled, as if surrendering to whatever this was. "It does." Ryan knew then that there was no turning back. This woman had walked into his life by chance. And now, she had become the most real thing he had ever known. Ryan hadn't planned on falling for Madeleine. He had told himself it would be nothing more than a job and opportunity too good to pass up. But every day, she proved him wrong. It wasn't just her wealth, or the way she carried herself with effortless confidence. It was the way she saw the world, how she challenged him, how she never treated him as anything less than her equal. And now, as he stood in his small apartment, watching her help Lily set the table for dinner, he realized she had become part of his life in a way he hadn't expected. Lily giggled as Madeleine attempted to fold napkins into intricate shapes. "That doesn't look like a swan," she teased, her eyes bright with amusement. Madeleine tilted her head, examining the crumpled napkin. "More like a very tired bird," she admitted, laughing softly. Ryan leaned against the kitchen counter, arms crossed as he took in the sight before him. It was a simple moment, nothing grand, nothing extravagant. But it hit him harder than any expensive car or fancy job offer ever could. She fit. Madeleine looked up then, catching him watching her. She didn't say anything, just offered a small, knowing smile before turning back to Lily. Ryan cleared his throat and pushed away from the counter. "Dinner's ready," he said, setting down a pan of roasted chicken and vegetables. They ate together, conversation flowing easily. Lily dominated most of it, telling stories about her day at daycare, while Madeleine listened attentively, laughing at all the right moments. When the plates were cleared and Lily had curled up on the couch with a book, Ryan found himself standing beside Madeleine at the sink, drying dishes as she washed. "You didn't have to help," he said, watching as she rinsed off a plate. "I wanted to," she replied simply. He studied her profile, the way the soft light of the kitchen cast a glow on her features. "This isn't your world," he murmured. She turned her head slightly, meeting his gaze. "Maybe it is now." His grip tightened around the dish towel. "Madeleine." She set the plate down carefully before turning to face him fully. "I know what you're thinking," she said, her voice softer now. "That this doesn't make sense, that we come from two different places." He exhaled slowly. "You're not wrong. But that doesn't mean it's impossible," she countered. Ryan ran a hand through his hair. He had spent so long thinking he would never have something like this, someone who saw him, who truly wanted to be part of his life, not just as a passing interest, but as something real. Madeleine took a step closer. "Tell me to leave and I will," she said, "but if you want me to stay, then stop fighting this." Ryan didn't answer right away. His thoughts warred with his emotions, logic screaming that this was too good to be true, while every instinct in his body told him to hold on to her. Then, without thinking, he reached for her, pulling her into his arms. Madeleine didn't hesitate. She melted into him, her fingers pressing against his back as she held on just as tightly. Ryan closed his eyes, letting himself breathe her in, letting himself believe, just for a moment, that this was real, and maybe, just maybe, it always had been. Weeks passed, and Madeleine became a constant presence in their lives. It wasn't just the quiet moments at dinner or the laughter-filled afternoons at the garage. It was the way she showed up, really showed up. For him, for Lily. She was there when Lily had a fever, sitting beside her with a cool cloth, whispering soft reassurances. She was there when Ryan had a rough day at work, listening without judgment, offering quiet support instead of empty words. She was there. And Ryan had never realized how much he had needed that until now. One evening, as they stood outside his apartment after a long day, he reached for her hand, lacing their fingers together. "You changed everything," he admitted, his voice rough with emotion. Madeleine squeezed his hand. "So did you." Ryan exhaled, looking down at her. "I don't deserve this," he murmured. She shook her head. "You deserve everything, Ryan." And for the first time in his life, he believed it, because with her, with Madeleine, he finally had everything he never knew he needed. Ryan hadn't been to a gala in his life, but as he adjusted the cuffs of the crisp black suit Madeleine had insisted he wear, he knew there was no backing out now. The event was one of the biggest in the city, a high-profile charity auction filled with the wealthiest of the wealthy, all people who lived in a world he never thought he'd step foot in. Yet here he was, standing beside Madeleine as they walked through the towering entrance of a grand ballroom, chandeliers glittering above them. She was breathtaking in an emerald green gown that hugged her curves before flowing effortlessly to the floor. Her hair was pinned back, revealing the delicate line of her neck, and when she turned to look at him, something warm flickered in her eyes. "You look good in a suit," she murmured, amusement laced in her tone. Ryan exhaled, tugging at his collar. "Feels like a costume." She looped her arm through his, her touch grounding him. "Then I guess we'll just have to make it feel real." The night was a blur of introductions, champagne glasses clinking, and hushed conversations filled with deals and power plays. Ryan had expected to feel completely out of place, but with Madeleine at his side, it wasn't as overwhelming as he had feared. She never once treated him like he didn't belong. Instead, she made sure he was included in every conversation, subtly guiding him when necessary, but never making him feel less than. At one point, they stepped onto the terrace, the cool evening air a welcome relief from the crowded ballroom. Ryan leaned against the railing, looking out at the city skyline, the distant hum of traffic below. Madeleine stood beside him, her gaze lingering on his profile. You handled tonight well, she said. He huffed a quiet laugh. Didn't spill anything on myself, so I guess that's a win. She smiled, but then her expression softened. You're more than you give yourself credit for, Ryan. His fingers tightened around the railing. This world, it's not mine. She reached for his hand, lacing her fingers through his. It can be if you want it to be. Ryan turned to face her fully, his pulse steady despite the whirlwind of emotions inside him. And if I don't, Madeleine didn't hesitate. Then I'll meet you wherever you are. His chest tightened at her words, at the quiet certainty in them. She wasn't trying to change him, wasn't asking him to become someone else. She just wanted him exactly as he was. Before he could respond, a familiar voice interrupted them. So this is the man who's been keeping you occupied. Ryan turned to see an older man approaching, his suit impeccable, his presence commanding. There was an air of authority about him, the kind that came with years of power and influence. Madeleine's grip on Ryan's hand tightened slightly. Father, Ryan's stomach clenched. He hadn't given much thought to Madeleine's family, but now, standing face to face with the man who had shaped her world, he knew this wasn't going to be a friendly exchange. Her father's sharp gaze assessed him in an instant, his expression unreadable. You've certainly chosen someone, unexpected. Ryan held his ground, refusing to be intimidated. That a problem? The older man tilted his head slightly. That depends. Madeleine stepped forward, her voice firm. We're not having this conversation, Father. Her father's expression softened just slightly. You've always been stubborn. She lifted her chin. And I always will be. A tense silence stretched between them before her father finally sighed. If this is what you truly want, then I won't stand in your way. Ryan wasn't sure if he believed the words, but Madeleine did. The relief in her eyes was fleeting, but it was there. Her father nodded once before stepping back into the ballroom, leaving them alone again. Ryan exhaled, running a hand through his hair. Well, that went better than I expected. Madeleine let out a quiet laugh. You have no idea. He turned to her, his expression serious. Are you sure about this? About us. She stepped closer, her hands resting against his chest. I've never been more sure of anything. Ryan didn't need to hear anything else. He cupped her face, pressing his lips to hers in a kiss that was slow and deep, filled with every unspoken promise between them. When they finally pulled apart, she smiled up at him. Let's go home. And just like that, the world they had built for themselves, unexpected, imperfect, but undeniably real, was exactly where they belonged.